Hello. In this video, what we'll be looking at is actually how to create a button to be able to be clicked and to make something occur when that button is selected. Now, in terms of actually Unity, I've just got a basic ground here, just a couple of just random objects. So when I do go into play mode, it just gives a little bit of difference to my scene rather than just the plain grey plain square. Now, one of the things that we need to do is we need to actually look at the scripting reference off the Unity website to find out how do we add a button. So the very first thing we'll do is we'll actually go to the Unity website and we will select the Learn tab. Inside the Learn tab, when that opens, you actually have four main areas. You have tutorials, documentation, live training, and community. All beneficial in their own right, but the one we're going to be looking at is documentation. Once we're in documentation, we'll actually be able to see that Unity documentation is here. And from here, you can actually go into the scripting reference. Now, the very first thing that we're actually going to do is we want to create a button, so let's search for button. Now, sometimes it can take a while for this to load. However, in this case, it's actually been quite quick. If it does take a while, just leave it, it will get there. Now, the very first thing is it actually has the clickable hyperlink up here on the top of each one, which doesn't usually tell us that much. What we want to read is the actual text beneath it to find out what it is. So the very first thing says, make a single press button. The user clicks them and something happens immediately. That by itself sounds what I want it to do. I could keep on reading, but I'm actually going to save some time and just select that one because it seems like it's going to do the right thing. From here, they have a lot of different information that we have, and it's got static function button. What does that mean? Well, when we say GUI button, we need to give it a position, and it's going to be rectangular in shape. Then we can either give it text string, so that's a button that says something, or we could even put an image in it, and so on and so forth. So let's actually make a very simple button for the moment. Now, to find out what actually is here, let's actually find out where we can get an example from. So the scripting reference is using JavaScript. So I'm actually going to use this code and select their example and go back to Unity. So I need to place that example into a script. Now, to create the script, I'm just going to first off create a new folder and call it scripts, just to keep my project organized. And inside that folder, I'm going to right click again and go create JavaScript. And what I'm going to label this one is I'm going to call this one button. Now, you can call it whatever you wish, however, that's where it is. Now, before I actually go and start coding this one, I'm actually going to apply it to an object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty game object, and I'm going to call that one button script object, because we actually need to apply this script to an object. Now, this object here doesn't actually look like anything. It's an invisible object. The only thing that it has is position values, and when we're coding it, it's not going to actually matter. So I'm just going to click and drag and drop that button script on top so I can see that it's attached. So from here, I'm going to double click on the JavaScript button and it will open up Unity's developer. Now, if you've set it up to be something else, that's fine, but you'll usually open up in MonoDevelop. I'm going to select what was there and delete it. And the very first thing is I'm going to paste the information that was from that example. So what I've just pasted here is exactly what I copied from here. From here, I'm just going to save the document. You'll see that that'll turn green down the side saying that it's saved and there's no changes. And we could have a quick bit of a debug to find out what's happening here, but let's actually just see what Unity tells us first. Okay, it looks like there's been a bit of an update and hit play. So initially, nothing happens and it says, please assign a texture on the inspector. So, very first thing that we need to do is it's now asking us for a texture. Let's see what's there by default. Let's just apply the snowflake. and you'll now see that there's a snowflake icon there and a click button. If I click the click button, it says click the button with text, and that one says click the button with an image. Now to actually modify this, let's actually break down the code a bit. They were actually in regards to being function on GUI, button, texture, so on and so forth. Now this part here is saying if there is not a button texture, then debug.log. So it's actually going to tell us, and it's not going to allow us to continue until we have that texture, which is why it errored out the first time. It's always good to have, just in case we do forget to have something like that. It does warn us and doesn't let us continue. But that's not going to make our button actually work. It's only helping us error log. So I'm going to remove it for the moment to help us understand it a little bit easier. The very next thing that we've got is we actually have a if statement here, and it actually refers to a variable which I'll refer to later. And then this button here is our second button, which actually said the word click. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say change that word click to this button. And the very first thing we're going to do is we're going to go through and save it, or you can press Control S and find out where that change actually occurs. So we'll jump back to Unity, wait for the change to actually occur, make sure there's no errors, and hit play. From there, we'll actually see that that no longer says click, but it's sort of saying this button, so it's not big enough. So we need to change the size of the button. Now if I was to go back to Unity and mono develop, we can actually see that there's a rect here. Now rect stands for rectangle, which is the shape of the button. So what we can actually do is I can actually go through and see these four values and find out what they mean. Well, to start off with, this one here is how far across from the screen is. So if we actually go to our screen, top left corner will be 0, 0. So it's going to be across 10. So the very first thing is the position of the button doesn't matter, because the button position is where it is on the screen, is actually in an alright spot for the moment, but it's not wide enough. So if that's how far across from the screen the button starts, this next one is how far from the screen from the top it is down. So if this one here was 10, then it's just down a little bit. If it was 100, it'll be down a lot more. And if it was down 1,000, on most screens it will be getting towards the bottom. If not, it's already fallen off. So I'm just going to leave that at 70 for now. The next one is actually the width of the button, so how wide the button is. Now our button needs to be a lot wider, so I'm actually going to change that to be 200. The next one I'm going to change is 30, is how tall our button is, so how high. I'm going to change that to 50 just to make sure. I'm going to save my changes and go back to Unity, give it a second to update, and then hit play. And already you can actually see that the position, top left position of the button is still 10 across. It is still 70 pixels from the top down, but it's gotten a lot wider. Now that's that number that I changed from 50 to 200. And then I've changed from the 30, so it was wasn't as high, is now a lot higher. Now that button is a lot bigger, and I can still click that button and it still says click the button with text. Okay, so let's unclick play. Now I want the button to appear in the center of the screen. So I could actually change that by going through, and let's just try typing in 500 and 500 and see what happens. Again, I'm ignoring that for the moment. We will come back to it. So save your changes, hit play, and you can actually see by putting it at 500, 500, it's moved the button from this location down here. Now that's not dead center of the screen. I could keep guessing, but what I'm actually going to do is that button, I want dead center. Now to get it dead center every single time, I'm actually going to use something called a dynamic situation. What that is we can actually type in screen dot width and screen dot height. Now what that's going to do is that's actually going to find the width of the screen, and it's going to place it on the far wide. Now we don't quite want it to be all the way on the right, do we? So what we need to do is we need to divide that number by 2. And it's the same with the height. It will place the button all the way at the bottom, but we need to actually see it halfway up. So I'm going to divide the height value by 2 as well. I'll save my changes, not open. I'll save my changes, go back to Unity, give it a second to update, and hit play. And you can now see it looks a little bit weird with the actual shapes that I've got, but that is now, this point right here is the dead center of the screen, of the width, and of the height. Now the reason why it looks a little bit off center is because the button actually starts there. So if we wanted to, we could come in and go screen.width divided by 2 minus 100 and minus 25, just their half value of the width and height. I'm going to save that, and you'll see that it looks a little bit nicer. It looks a little bit more central that way. Now, that's just for text-based buttons, and it still says click the button with text. What about this one of click the button with an image? So if I keep clicking that one, how could I change that around? Well, the very first thing is you'll see that in our inspector window, we have this button texture, and where we applied the snowflake earlier. If we go to Unity Develop, or Mono Develop, sorry, we can actually see at the top of our script, we can see this far button texture as a texture. So what we can actually do is we can actually change button texture, and wherever we put the word button texture, so such as there, it allows us to actually move it. So the very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to move this button across a bit, and I'm going to make the button a little bit longer. So rather than 50, I'm going to make it about 100. Save that, and we'll go back to Unity just to see what's actually happening. And from there you can actually see the button's moved across a bit, and it's also gotten larger. Now if I want to change the actual location of the button, it's the exact same as the text. The only part of that we are changing is, if we go back to Mono Develop, is either this button, and it's in text because it's got these quotation marks. And whenever you've got the quotation marks, remember that that means that it's string. It's going to be words. When we don't put the quotation marks over the top, it means that it's actually a variable or some form of coding component that the program actually knows how to read and interpret. So if I was to go through and place quotation marks over this now, on either side of the word, save that, have a guess at what will happen. Play. Spot on. It converts that to a texture. It doesn't matter that we've got a picture there, because we're actually referring to it as text. So when we want the variable, we want that image that's been applied to apply there. Now to actually change the image, let's actually say we want button texture and we want 2 buttons. So button texture, and I'm actually going to create a new variable called button texture second. I'm going to define that as a texture. And what we'll actually see is this button texture second. I'm actually going to replace this with the word this button. So the very first thing we'll do is we'll go back to Unity, hit play test, and see what happens. So the very first thing is you haven't noticed any change with that button. However, since I've used that new variable, we don't see any words in this button here. It still can be clicked. So what we're going to do now is we're going to actually apply another texture, and we're going to do it in a different way. So in our project window, under whatever files you have, I've actually just got the standard assets particle. And let's go source, textures. We can actually see all these textures. We can actually come in and let's actually apply for this second one. Let's apply just the fire symbol. So we get a bit of fire and ice effect. If we hit play, all of a sudden we now see that that has our fire button. Now the one thing that you will notice is the actual graphic is not the same size as the button. The button stretches, but the image doesn't. For our level, make sure that when you're designing your graphics and your images to be looked at on the button, design them to be the size that you need them to be. That will be the easiest thing for you to go on at this stage. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.